All right, the recording is my cue. So it's 11 a.m. and we will get started with today's webinar. My name is Kristen, and from all of us on David's team, I just would like to extend a heartfelt thank you for committing to spend 90 minutes of your day with us. And thank you for joining us at our new time. As always, we're really looking forward to spending this time with you, and we're confident that today's session on authenticity will have a real and meaningful impact on the way you lead and the way you live. David's work and David's life are rooted in authenticity, and he's so passionate about and has a real gift for helping leaders connect with their authentic selves. I know we have some first timers, which is really excellent to see. For those of you that have been with us before, you may know that David has more than 35 years of experience as a family therapist, workshop facilitator, lecturer, and advisor to leadership executives from all over the world. He's worked with CEOs from companies such as WestJet, Investors Group, Lilydale, and PharmaSave Drugs, and presented to countless organizations over the last several decades. David's a best-selling author and respected thought leader in the leadership community. These monthly webinars are just one of the many ways that David's able to share his message, his knowledge, and his passion with as many people as possible. So thank you again for being here today. And thank you for being a part of this incredible, diverse community. It's always so exciting to see leaders from all over Canada and beyond in various lines of work and various stages of their life and career with the common bond of wanting to show up as the best versions of themselves. Whether this is your first time or if you've been with us since the beginning, if you find value in our time together today, we'd really appreciate you sharing an invitation to our next webinar with someone in your life. It's so exciting to see this incredible community grow. As you all know, when it comes to leadership and learning, the journey and the responsibility never end. So without further ado, here is David.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, everybody. Kristen, thank you for your usual authentic presence and your passion and your support of this work. Thank you, everybody. This is my life's work. It's not a job for me. This is what I feel called to do. And I am really, really grateful that you would spend an hour and a half with us this morning. And this is what I want to promise you today. First of all, I want to have you reflect on what authenticity really means. It's been one of those things that we're going to go on a journey, first of all. As you know, those of you who have been in any of my presentations before, this isn't just a presentation, it's a real personal journey for me. And I'm going to start with the first part of this is going to be my authentic story. And what I really perceive to be, I've been researching this for the last 25 years before it became popular. There's so many misconceptions about what authenticity is, what authenticity isn't. And I hope to shine a light on giving you some clarity on what that really means so that you can get a real clear language around what we mean by authenticity. And then I want to finish off with some strategies, some really concrete strategies. First of all, with yourself, to be more authentic yourself, and we'll talk about why it matters. And then we'll talk about how to create a community around you of authentic, an authentic team. So it's a tremendous privilege to be able to offer some of my perspective here, and I hope it's helpful for you to reflect in your own life. Authenticity is very, very difficult to define. You just kind of know when it's there. It's a lot like beauty. You know when it's there. When you go into an art museum and someone says, "Oh, that was really beautiful," and then you come out from the art museum. And then a person asks you, well, what makes it beautiful? And well, you just have to kind of experience it yourself. So I hope that you'll have an experience with authenticity, because it's probably the best way for me to teach it, which is to live it. As Kristen said, this is kind of a cross-section. I'll tell you my story about how this whole thing around authenticity came into being. So this is kind of a cross-section of some of the organizations and leadership that I know that we've got people on the call from many of these organizations and some amazing, incredible leaders. But my story really started back in the 1980s as a family therapist. It's very interesting when you're a family therapist, nobody ever brings in their good kids. So all I saw were people in pain, and I thought there's got to be a better way to do this. So I started to do presentations back in the 80s for parents. And I had business executives coming to my parenting talks as parents, and they said, gosh, you should come into our company and work with our company. And quite by accident, I started to work, and I knew nothing about. I remember those early days. I knew nothing about organizations. I said, I'm just going to come in as a consultant. You know what? And I had no idea what I was really talking about. But I said, I'll just take what I learned from families and adapt it into organizations. And it really landed with people. And just out of word of mouth, I gave up my family therapy practice and came and started my work as an organizational development and leadership development consultant back in the early 90s. I met up with a couple of guys, and we wrote this book together, the three of us, Bruce Klatt, Sean Murphy, and I. And it really was the book that got me landed, you know, and it really positioned me. And it was their organizational development background. They had collectively probably 30 years in working with organizations and developing this accountability system. And it was my philosophy that I had got from raising accountable kids, because this was a real passion of mine, is how do you build accountability within a family? And then we married those ideas together and we wrote this book. We probably sold over 300,000 copies or just around the world. And it really put me on the map. And, you know, it started to, and I'm very grateful for these two guys. And it started me on this path of understanding organizations. It was also very, you know, strangely enough, it was very healing for me, my mental health, talking about accountability. You know, I used to think you had to know something to write a book about it. And what I've discovered today is if you want to learn something, write a book about it and travel around the country and talk about it for 10 years. And so teaching organizations for 10 years, we had this great program that we got, you know, we replaced performance management systems with our accountability process. And we still sell this book today. But something was missing. Something was not there. And it became a transactional. You know, we had, you know, all these companies using this, but people weren't necessarily as engaged. It was clear. It was, you know, we got the clarity around it, but there was something really fundamentally missing. And I couldn't really articulate what that was. And I started to, and this was in the early 2000s, and I started to do some research. And we interviewed probably 4,000 people in a wide variety of organizations. And we asked them, what do you want from your leaders? And this is when I was beginning to articulate what this was that was missing in our work around accountability. And what we got was that people inevitably said, we want our leaders to get past the fads and the gimmicks and the flavors of the month, and we just want our leaders to be real. And so I started to write a book about real leadership. And what I discovered is that before you can be a real leader, you have to be a real human being. And this notion, I didn't have the word for it at the time, but this notion of authenticity was beginning to be planted in me. This was about 20 years ago. And then I ran into this guy. And I think Jim actually I hope Jim is on the call today. I know he was registered for this, and I hope he was able to make it. And Jim, if you have time to stick around afterwards, I'd love you to introduce yourself. I give credit, you know, to Jim. He was a former executive with Hewlett Packard. We wrote a couple of books together, and he really solidified and helped me articulate this whole notion of authenticity, and began to really formulate a model and an approach for how do we build authentic organizations. And just think about the places where you where you haven't been able to really be who you are, where you have to leave who you are at the door, and just recognizing what that's like versus places that really support you to be who you are. So I really give credit to Jim for his support of this work, and you know, we just had a blast traveling around doing this work around authenticity. But what we discovered then is that accountability is the ability to be counted on. And, you know, that in itself is a word that's very misunderstood today. It should inspire people, it shouldn't, you know, it's not meant to deplete you. But again, it's necessary to build a good culture to have accountability, but it's not sufficient. And so what we do is that we marry it with this notion of authenticity, which is residing in one's true nature. It's that simple and it's that complex to live in alignment with who you are. And so so accountability without authenticity is drudgery. But authenticity without accountability is fantasy. And when we put it together and marry those two together, we have this thing called destiny, an unstoppable organization when we combine those together. And so this is really the work that I've been doing. So let's focus now on what does it mean to be authentic? What does authenticity really mean? It's the greatest privilege of a lifetime is being who you are, said Joseph Campbell. Well, it's that simple, but it's that complex. Who are we, right? I have a dream, and I'm going to share with you my dream. This dream is not yet well articulated. It's emerging. It's amazing how I continue to learn. And you know what? I want to thank you. I remember Bruce Springsteen once after a Broadway play stopped the audience, stopped the round of applause that he was getting, and he thanked the audience for helping live his purpose. He said, without the audience, there's no purpose. We're all interconnected here. And so as I have deepened this work, my dream also has clarified. So I want to help create a more fully human world that honors the interconnectedness of all living things, that everyone finds a place where they know that they belong, where it's safe to be who you are, and where we all know that we have something valuable to offer. This is my dream, that we create workplaces that make this real. Okay, that we sustain this sense that we all in a healthy culture is a diverse culture. A healthy organization is a diverse organization. Just like the physical ecosystems, a diverse ecosystem is a healthy ecosystem. A diverse environment is a healthy ecosystem. And we're very yet not learned well in terms of understanding how do we work together and honor diversity without sameness. A unified organization is not the same as a uniformed organization. We have to, how do we bring our diverse self to this, at the same time honoring our differences, and at the same time belonging? And I love this quote by Rudyard Kipling. It's really a foundation piece for the work that I do. Now, this is the law of the wolf pack, as old and as true as the sky, and as the wolf that shall keep it will prosper, but the wolf that would break it must die. As the creeper that girdles the tree trunk, the law runneth forward and back, for the strength of the pack is the wolf, and the strength of the wolf is the pack. We don't get a strong wolf without a strong pack, but we don't get a strong pack without a strong wolf. You don't get a good organization without strong employees, but you don't get strong employees without a strong organization. They're all interconnected. And so today we're going to really focus on the wolf, the strength of your own authentic presence, and what we really mean to bring your full wolf nature, whatever that is, in your own unique way to whatever you do. Now, we'll also talk in the strategies, because you can't isolate a strong wolf from a strong pack. So I can't teach how to be a strong wolf without also understanding that with that comes some understanding of how do we interconnect and how do we belong together. So having said that, let me just share with you a story. Many of you have heard me speak, have heard this is the best story I've got in terms of understanding what authenticity is. But this is me up on the Mackenzie River shortly before the pandemic. And I was brought up, I do a lot of work with the RCMP and have done over the years. I'm sure we've got some members on the call today. But I was up in Inuvik, and they brought me up a day early and gave me a dog sled in April and on the Mackenzie River. It doesn't get any better. And it was an amazing experience for me, and one that will stay with me the rest of my life. But, it's an amazing, and I want to talk about these dogs, talk about a wolf pack. These dogs are born to work. You put a sled, they're in these kennels, and you put a sled in front of them, and you actually have to, I don't know if you can see this, but that's actually an anchor that's put in the ice, because once you hook them up to that sled, they're gone. They are just born to work. The worst thing you can do with these dogs is send them to a work-life balance workshop. They are born to work. That is their nature. That is what I would call their authentic self. It's very interesting. After they retire, you would think, oh, they'd be worn out and tired, and be glad to retire, but they don't live long after they retire because they don't have a purpose. Their purpose is to work. And the only instructions you get, they teach you how to turn them left and right, but basically the only instructions you get is if you fall off, hang on, because they won't stop. They're born to run. So, this was an amazing day that I had, and these incredible, incredible animals, and just observing the whole nature of leadership and how, they're not all meant to be lead dogs. There's some that lead from behind. There's some that lead from the front. And they all have this place, but they all have their basic nature. And it's a beautiful model of how we can work together. But I share this quote that there lies within every person a place that when we're connected to it, we feel deeply and intensely alive. At such moments, there's a quiet voice inside that says, this is the real me. This is really me. And now I just want you to stop for a moment and ask yourself, when was the last time that you connected with that voice where you were doing something or being a certain way in the world that you could declare, put your flag in and say, this is the real me? And when are you not the real you? And we're not trained and supported to really guide ourselves or to be guided to the real me. We live in this world that tells us how we should be. We're taught to think outside the box. Now, this is a useful thing, but my question isn't, how do you think outside the box? My question is, how did you get into the box to begin with? How did you get into the box in the first place? Why do we need to teach people to get out of the box? It's because we've been locked in the box. So how do you get into the box? Well, let's go back to the roots of what authenticity essentially is. Now, this is actually just an excuse to introduce you to my grandson. Now, this little guy is now 15 and is a track athlete and soccer athlete and an amazing, but I'm a little biased about this, so I digress. Sorry about that. But here's now when you look into this person's eyes, you will see authenticity. We are all born with our own true nature. We are not born, folks, as blank slates. Any parent here understands that has more than one child, or any aunt or uncle here who's been close to their niece and nephew, understand that kids have their own unique nature when they are born. I mean, we have 3 daughters. One's a graphic designer, one is a drama teacher, English and drama teacher, and one's a police officer. So those were, you could say they were raised in the same family, but those kids were different kids right from day one. So this is where authenticity starts. And my best description that I can give you is that authenticity is beauty, truth, and love. If it doesn't meet those criteria, it isn't authentic, because this is purely where we come from, our true authentic sense of ourselves. Now, truth is, it's not relative. It's unarguable. For example, if I say to you, I'm hurt right now, I'm hurting, or what you said is hurtful, or what you did created a place for me, I don't feel safe here. That's truthful. It's unarguable. If I give you an opinion about you or this organization or this world, that is arguable. Our opinions aren't truth. Truth is our own experience. And when we connect with our own experience, it's compelling. And when we connect with our own experience, it cannot help but radiate beauty unless you are protected from seeing beauty, because many people can walk through this life and from their own walls and their own pain and their own distance from their own authentic self, they don't see beauty. So I'm getting ahead of myself, but that's the first thing I want to say. Now, we are born authentic, but what happens is that we grow up in this world that tells us how we should be. And so we conform to the world in a way of trying to make us safe, and being ourselves, being beautiful and truthful and full of, who our true essence isn't safe, or we don't survive, or we feel like we're not going to survive if we bring our true essence out. So we compromise ourselves and we construct a self in order to fit into the world. And we diminish who we're meant to be in this lifetime. And what we do is that we end up hiding our true self. And I define hiding as downplaying or covering up certain aspects of yourself out of fear of being different, or out of fear that being different or associating with someone different will prevent you from feeling safe. So I just want you to stop and just for a moment, ask yourself, when have you ever been in a relationship, either at work or in your personal life, where you had to give up a piece of your heart, where you wanted to bring some beauty and it wasn't recognized, where your needs were suppressed to say, this is what I really need, not your wants, but your needs, the truth of who you are? I can just give you an example right now. And, this comes back to kids. And I still, to this day, regret something that happened in my life. But when my daughter was 4, and grandma was coming to visit us, and I was spending time complaining about my mother-in-law visiting again. And when grandma came to the door, and I said to grandma, Grandma, it's so nice to see you. We really appreciate you coming. And my 4-year-old perked up and said, I thought you didn't like grandma. Well, I've been digging myself out of that hole for the last 20 years. Now, I'm very grateful that I didn't send her to her room, because I was so embarrassed that often when we're embarrassed, and this is what happens as parents, when you get embarrassed, and we've all had parents, when parents get embarrassed or they get hurt or they feel helpless or they feel like they can't bring their authentic self to their life, what we do is that we just punish kids. What would have happened? How many of you were sent to your room for telling the truth? And then we get confused. Well, I'm going to stop telling the truth because it certainly isn't safe. Some people were slapped in the face for telling the truth. And we learned very early on, I'm not going to tell the truth here. For my survival, when you're 4 years old, only an idiot is going to keep telling the truth. Whenever you tell the truth, you get punished. And so what we do is that we begin to erode ourselves, our true self. What I did was what every respecting adult would do in that case is I lied. And I said, oh, no, Haley, you didn't. That's not what you heard. And again, I diminished her. Now, maybe it wasn't quite as harsh as a punishment, but it was a punishment in its own way. Rather than validating her and saying, yes, you heard correctly, and I made a mistake. Now, the challenge was I wasn't truthful right to begin, because complaining about my mother-in-law actually wasn't the truth. The truth was, and this is where we impulsively give our emotions without telling the truth. The truth was, I needed time just to be alone with my family. And if I would have connected with the truth, then that whole experience, and you know what? I still could have embraced my mother-in-law for coming to visit, even though I wished that we could have just had the family alone that weekend. And that would have been clear. And so often, none of us are clear, none of us are 100% clear. We're all imperfect. And so we make up stuff and we think we have to hide in order to be safe. And my message is, let's struggle to bring that out. So how many of you have compromised your passion, your creativity, your sexual orientation, your ethnic heritage, your gender, or your dreams? How many of you have felt like, my parents couldn't handle this, so we suppress it and hide? Because what we thought was it was something about me. What we didn't realize, if you look back and explore your upbringing, you realize your parents just weren't authentic themselves. They weren't taught to be authentic in their upbringing. And so this becomes intergenerational. And what we realized is that underneath all of this, what we do is that we hide our genius. We hide our gifts. We hide when we hide any of these things, we hide who we are, and we don't bring our full self to our lives and to our work. The other side of hiding, and it's the same coin, but it's the opposite side of the same coin, is when we get judgmental and we become prejudiced and impulsive and manipulative and abusive and cruel and belittling, to name a few. These are just opposite sides of the same coin that say, I have to do these things in order to feel safe. And so we learn, and when we've had trauma, and I love what Theo, the hockey player, Theo Fleury, said, that, if you had parents, you had trauma. We all had a degree of trauma, and I don't want to minimize that. I actually want to bring it into the light. We've all had these traumatic experiences. And what happens is, and any time that we are expected to give up, I'm going to define trauma as any time that you have to give up a part of yourself in order to be safe. That is by definition traumatic. Okay. Now there are other, it goes beyond that, but if that ever happened to you, trauma goes beyond that. But if that ever happened to you, I'm going to call that trauma. And if you've ever experienced trauma, at least trauma that continues, that could, once that can happen, but if it becomes a pattern, and then you begin to have a pattern of hiding, and then you bring that same pattern into your workplace, now we find ourselves, I have to hide in the workplace in order to survive because I'm operating out of an old survival myth. What happens then is that as we hide ourselves, what happens is that we just shut ourselves off. And I just lost my train of thought there. But when that continues, when we've been traumatized, we either become a predator or we become prey, where we become very careful, and we say, I'm going to be very careful. I'm not going to express myself fully here because it's not safe. And we carry that on, or we become a predator where we take it externally. We can either internalize it or externalize it, but it's the same coin of self-preservation and self-protection. To create a place for us to feel safe. How many of you know micromanagers? How many of you know people who are over controlling? This is just, how many of you know people who are bullies at work? These are just ways that people use to feel safe. I have to control the world. I have to control the people around me in order for me to feel safe. And then you give them a title, or you give them some power in an organization, and it doesn't end well. But, as we say, people who are violent, who impose their will on other people, what we really know is that violence is what happens when people don't know what to do with their suffering. So we've been hurt, and this is how it gets expressed. So let me just draw out my little model. Some of you I know have seen this model, but it's my way of describing this whole authentic journey. So we are born authentic. We're born with what I call the soul's desire. We are born with a calling. We are born as a seed of possibility, a destiny to be realized in this lifetime. Just like an oak tree is born to one day, an acorn is one day born to be a giant oak tree. We are all within us, have a seed of possibility. But what happens is that we grow up in this world, that we shut ourselves off, we hide, and we diminish our full potential, our full expression of ourselves in order to be safe. And the best side of that is that we develop what I call your accountable self. The society has demands. And so we develop this notion of being accountable to say, I'm going to show up for the world. And this is a necessary part of our upbringing. But what happens is if we stay accountable, what happens is that we're going to hit a red line. And we're all going to hit this at some point if we get overly accountable at the expense of our authentic self, at the expense of taking care and nurturing the soul's desire. We just meet society's expectations, and we give the world what the world wants. I've had my own business since 1983. And it's been very interesting because people say, "Oh, you've had your own business. Surely you can be authentic." But it's interesting that for years, a client would call me and say, "What do you offer?" And I would say, "What do you want?" And they would tell me what they want, and I give them what they want. And I built my whole business around how to be accountable, how to meet the client's needs. But then one day you hit this red line, and you begin to say, "Hey, what do I want?" Many of us on this call know more what our clients, our customers, our bosses, our teams want, our families want. We know more what the world wants then what do you really want? What is your soul's desire? Not just your impulsive, and I'll get to that in a minute, but what does your soul really want? We're not trained at how to do that. We're not guided to that in our lives. We're just expected to meet the world's expectations because the world functions a whole lot better. Our parents function better. Our education system functions better. Our bosses function better when people just behave and do what they're told. So if you behave and do what you're told, then we learn that's the way to stay safe. But this red line will hit. And where it hit for me, well, it hit in several places. It hit through depression, because I'll tell you, depression and burnout, which are very much linked, is not about heartache. It's not about hard work. It's about heartache. When you're removed from your authentic self, this is, I've struggled with depression in my life, and I've learned that it's a gift because it serves me. It surfaces when I get too far removed from my authentic self, when I get too accountable, when I get too, and now again, accountability is a necessary, but it's not sufficient for a whole life. The death of my brother, walking my brother through the cancer journey, was a red line for me to say, what does my soul really desire? I'm not going to live forever. When your brother passes and you walk your brother through the dying process, you begin to realize it awakens you to what really matters in your life. And so I begin to go through this. The pandemic has been a red line for me to really examine, hey, what do I really want to bring to the world? And this is what I've been working on in this last 2 years, is to formulate a dream and a team to help really bring that fully to the world. At any rate, there's a third component here, and that's your adolescent self. And this is where the 3 misconceptions of authenticity is. That authenticity is self-serving, it's impulsive, and it's always pleasurable. So when you see a boss walking around the office, yelling at people and being a jerk, well, that's just my authentic self. Folks, we are not born a jerk. You learn to be a jerk. This is a learned response. So be careful when you say, I'm being authentic. You ask yourself, which voice are you listening to? When Shakespeare said, to thine own self be true, it's a great line, but which self are we talking about here? This is a very important distinction. Don't just assume, well, I've got this impulse to run off with my secretary and leave my 3 kids and travel around the world. I guess we're not going to travel very far these days unless you want to wait in line. But nonetheless, I digress. But don't just think, oh, this is my authentic self. No, just because it's a feeling is not necessarily authentic. Being impulsive isn't necessarily authentic. You have to really dig a little deeper and go below the surface to really understand, what does it mean to be authentic? Now, my dream would be that we integrate in organizations. This is the very thing I was talking about to begin the session today, to integrate the accountable self with the authentic self. And then in the process, the adolescent impulsive, just this emotional self, self-serving self, begins to dissolve, and that we integrate these 2 together. Okay. So my own story about this, and many of you again have heard this story. This is, if you're not, if it doesn't look too familiar, this is me in the background here. And this is me. And if you go back in your life and examine when you were the most alive in your life, this is when I was the most alive in the first 5 years of my life. I was born to be a relational person, to teach about relationships. I felt at home with all my dolls. This is where I felt most alive. And this is where I would call myself, I wouldn't have obviously been able to articulate it then, but that it was really when I was authentic, is when I was with my dolls and I was relating with my dolls. I've taught at university. I'm not an academic. I love academic, I love at least the result of academics, but I'm not an academic. I'm not a politician. I respect when people, work, but I'm not a political kind of person. But I respect that, but I'm a relational person. And I have to, in order for me to feel alive, I have to be in relationship. One of the reasons why this pandemic has been so difficult for me, because I've had to give up, hugs and handshake. I'm a hugs and handshake guy. I'm a relationship guy until, so I knew that this is when I was most alive, until grade 1. And in grade 1, now this is 1962 in rural Alberta, I took all my dolls to school for show and tell. Now, this was my first experience in humiliation. And what did I do after I got humiliated? Everybody laughed at me. What do I do when I'm humiliated? You know, only an idiot is going to take their dolls back to school. It was not a safe place. I didn't have the maturity or the clarity to say, listen, this is your sexual hangups, not mine. I'm going to keep bringing my dolls because this is who I am. I didn't have the courage or the clarity to do that. I don't, to this day, understand how my parents had the courage to let me take my dolls to school, but that's one of the things I think they did right. They had to let me go through this experience, and I think I'm a better person for it. It was, by the way, this is one of those defining moments that makes us who we are, that looks like at the time it's hell to get through, but it actually helps you define who you are. At any rate, what I do with my dolls, I took them home, never looked at them for 20 years. And I gave up that part of myself, and I tried to conform and be a person that I wasn't in the world. And this is when I was very depressed, inarticulate teenager. And it wasn't until I found my dolls in my 20s, when my parents sold the farm, and I was a big brother in those days, and I gave all my dolls to my little brother who was 5 years old. And I said, you know, it's okay for boys to play with dolls. You might just not want to take them yet to school. Nonetheless, I have been on this journey of recapturing my true essence for the rest of my life. And, you know, what we're most capable of teaching others is what we're most in need of developing within ourselves. And so this has been a path for me. And I can tell you all kinds of defining moments that led to this notion of really capturing my voice. Even in the development of this academy that we've got next week coming up, I had a marketing director that was directing me in a certain way. And I said, no, I have to find my values. I have to find my voice as we market this. And that was really hard for me. Even I'm the boss, and it was still hard for me to speak my truth and say, no, this is what we have to do to make this happen. And I drifted from that. Anyway, this is my story. So I would be curious, what is your story? When have you given, what is your own doll story? When have you given up a part of yourself in order to fit in order to be safe in the world? My dad gave up his artistic nature. He suffered too from depression, and he was diagnosed early on in his life with manic depression. And he really struggled with this. He was an administrator, tried to be an administrator, tried to fit in a culture that he didn't feel could honor. He couldn't honor his own artistic nature, and he couldn't honor the artistic nature in himself. So what he did was he suppressed that, and he didn't really come into his full true self until he was 65 years old, went back to university and said, I found my love for the first time in his life. And this is one of his early paintings, and he called it emerging. You can see the emerging self within this painting. And it was what he was most proud of, is this emerging self out of his buried self, and he was bringing his true self to the world. So what's it like to live your life and not be the real you? My good friend, Alan Donsky, who's a psychiatrist here in Calgary, child psychiatrist, and he and I have worked together. We just developed a really good friendship over the last few years. Well, he actually did some research, and he interviewed 922 people, and he asked them that question. And basically, these are the top 8 words in order of priority of what happens when you live your life and you're not the real you. It's exhausting. It's depressing. It's sad, stressful, lonely, disengaged, and empty. Let's not blame the pandemic. Let's really look inside and say, what do we need to do? There are certainly variables that make it difficult, but that's our challenge today. How do we create a place where people can live and be the real self? Then he asked him another question. What is it like to accept yourself? And these were the questions. These were the answers to that. Happy, confident, joyous, free, inspiring, appreciative, alive. Now, very important, you can't hate yourself into not liking yourself. You can't hate yourself into liking yourself. We are so brutal on ourselves. And part of authenticity is to accept and be aware of this journey. So I have a list of words. You know, we could all come up with words. How do you know when you're being authentic? We are so, it's such an undeveloped muscle. We're so untrained, if you will, to know when we're even being authentic, because we're so trained to be accountable and to show up in the world, which is necessary. But again, it's not sufficient. So these are some words that I would use to describe inauthenticity: exhausted, impatient, resistant, disengaged, disconnected, stressed, and empty. You talk about, you want to get engagement in organizations, you got to create a place where people can be who they are. And we just have never, when have you ever had a performance review where you were asked, how's your sweet satisfaction? How are we doing with your authentic self here? Are we supporting you to be who you really are here? I know we got job expectations. We got to be accountable here. No, I'm not diminishing that, but we also have to bring the other side into the equation versus authenticity, trusting, open, honest. You're in the flow. You lose track of time, engaged, connected, joyful, peaceful, fulfilled. You're filled. And then your giving comes from overflow. So leading authentically means, the Japanese said it this way. They have a word called ikigai. It's called your reason for being. And it's where your gifts and your passion and your contribution intersect. This is your sweet spot. And are we helping people grow that? It's not possible to live our whole life in that sweet spot. But what if we could really define for ourselves, what are you doing that's in that sweet spot? And what are you doing to grow that? You will get a loyal employee if you would say, you know what, I want to help you with your gifts here. And I want to help you find your passion and then help you serve this organization with your gifts, with your passion. It's not isolated. Authenticity by nature has to come, as I said, with love. It has to come with a contributing element to it, or else it's purely not authentic. It makes the world a better place. And I always say, as leaders, we need to fit people, don't fix people. We've spent far too much time evaluating what people's weaknesses are and strengthening their weakness. Folks, that's a low return on your investment of time with them. Find their strengths. We are trained from the time we're, in grade school to say, we bring home a report card with 5 B's, 1 F. What would get noticed? That F would get noticed. Maybe it would be better. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't repeat the class and try harder in that class, but maybe we'd be better if we took one of those B's that was our strength and turned that B into an A rather than the F into a B or a C. So it's just, we're conditioned because it's easier and it's safe when we're managing a large population or when we're managing our family. It's just easier and safe to behave yourself. It's just easier to run an organization if we just behave ourselves and do what we're told. But folks, then we wonder why we get low engagement scores, because we haven't had the courage to bring ourselves to the work, and we haven't had the clarity to create a workplace where people can be who they are. So, and by the way, maybe in this conversation, there is not a fit here. They're not bad people. They're not troubled, and they're not problem employees. They may be that we just can't find a fit. We do the best we can, but sometimes you have to have the hard conversation to say, you know what, you got to move on. I'm going to help you move on because there isn't a fit here. Now, maybe also another possibility is that the real ikigai is lived in their personal life. And this is just a job. Well, then stop complaining about your job and say, well, this gives me an opportunity to live my ikigai in my personal life. There's nothing wrong with that. That's called an avocation, when your ikigai is in your non-paid work, and your vocation is when you get paid to live your ikigai. And either one is valid, but don't lay it on the boss if you're not finding your own path to this, to being authentic. So it's a shared responsibility between you bringing your authentic self to work and the organization supporting you to do that in a way that is accountable and serves the organization. So what I want to leave you with in these last 15 minutes here before we open it up for some questions and answers, that I just want to give you a few concrete strategies, some hands-on practical ideas for how to be authentic, how to create an authentic life around you. So the first one is create a sanctuary, embrace the hard stuff, be curious, open your heart, and stay weird. So let's just go through these one at a time. And then I hope that you're either putting some questions into the chat room, giving some comments, and I know Kristen's going to help me out with the chat room when we're all finished here. And then we'll address your questions, or you can, there'll be an opportunity in person, or, face to face, for us to answer some of those questions. I hope I'm just giving you my philosophy and perspective on life, and I hope that it's awakening conversation within you. All right, so first of all, you got to create a sanctuary. Now, I love to go up with the horse. I got a good friend, got 85 head of horses, and this is one of my sanctuaries where I just go up. I haven't been up there all winter. This was the last time I was up there, was last summer, but this is where I go. I don't even have to ride these horses. I just go hang out with them. Basically, what I mean by a sanctuary is a place in our life where we can go, where we are away from the demands of the world, where we can go and listen to our own voice. We are so inundated today with the voices, the expectations, the demands of other people. And social media, the more we stay on social media, what's popular, how are we supposed to be? I mean, I'm 66 years old. How many voices do you think there are in this world that tells me how to be a cool 66-year-old? Now, how many voices are in this world that help me find my own voice? I see people who have their device on their bedside table and wake up in the morning, and the immediate thing they do is turn on their device, and they're answering emails and responding to the demands of other people before they even get out of bed. And they're listening to the internet, and they're on or whatever you do on your device. Leave your device out of your bedroom. Get an alarm clock. Buy a $5 alarm clock if you need an alarm clock, but leave your device in another room so that your first hour of the day is at least a sanctuary. Before I turn on the computer in the morning, before I check my emails, before I do anything in the morning, I make it a point to have quiet time, to find my own voice. It is the most important hour of the day. That is my sanctuary in the morning. Getting your bearings. This dog of ours, this is our backyard, and this dog will literally sit for 2 hours like this. And he teaches me to slow down. Everywhere I go today, I hear, how are you? Just ask people, just do a random check. How are you? The number one thing that people are going to tell, I'm busy. I'm busy. I'm busy. Everybody's busy. What are we busy doing? Now, the response to that is, if you ever hear yourself or somebody else say that they're busy, here's the response I want you to give them. Is it a good busy? Now, there's no way that the world can answer that question. You have to stop, get your bearings, and go inside and answer that question for yourself. Is this a good busy? Next time you're tired, ask yourself, is this a good tired or a bad tired? Bad tired says you're working in misalignment with your authentic self. Now, sometimes we authentically have to do that. Maybe we're supporting our family, and I'm saying, you know what, this is not where my heart is. Where my heart is, I want to support my family financially, and I'm going to make a conscious choice to let go of my authentic self and my work at this stage in my life. That's completely valid if you do it consciously. That's what my point is. So just ask yourself, am I good? And what do I need to say no to make room for a better busy in my life that's more aligned with my authenticity? It's an old and ironic habit of human beings to run faster when we've lost our way. I've spent time in the wilderness, and I have been lost, and I get anxious when I get lost. The natural tendency when you're lost is to speed up. And think of the speed in our world today. And I wonder how much of it is deflecting and avoiding the discomfort of going inside and finding our authentic voice. And then we wonder why we have so many mental health challenges. It's just, I just can't help but feel that those are correlated. What have you done lately? Here's some questions for you. What have you done lately that made you feel liberated and alive? What activities constrict you? Just check your energy. Life, organizational life, leadership, it's all about energy. What is the price of being authentic? What's the prize? What courage is required? What compassion is needed to be patient with yourself, to say, you know what, I locked a part of myself off, but you can't awaken that part of yourself through judgment and self-criticism. You have to do it through self-compassion. What truth needs to be told in your life? Not blame, but what truth needs to be told in your life that you've been avoiding as a way of staying safe? You got to listen, I would suggest. Being authentic means that there's a compass, not a device, but a compass that lives in your heart. And we need to, I would encourage, if you want to live authentically, and which is the key, you know, it's the pathway to a meaningful life, a contributing life, a fulfilled life. It's, by the way, it's where you earn credibility and trust on your teams, is when you are truly authentic. You got to take the time to go inside and listen to that inner compass. And let me tell you, we're not well versed at learning how to do that. Embrace the hard stuff. Basically, what I want to say about that is move toward what's difficult. Move toward what's difficult. It's painful, but move toward it. As we say in the trauma literature, look the dragon in the eye. Don't avoid it. The more you avoid it, the more frightening the dragon becomes. As the old myths will tell you, the closer you get to that dragon, the less fearful it is. That, you know, what you fear the most is where your greatest gift lies. So authenticity will give you this credibility and trust and freedom and vitality, meaning and purpose in your life. But you got to take what I call this other Everest journey. And many of you are familiar with my philosophy about this, but for those of you who aren't, we have a society of growing up. You know, the whole premise of our society, you got to grow up. You got to find the next summit. You got to make the next achievement. What grades are you going to go to? What university are you going to go to? It's always about the next summit. I suggest, which is a valid journey, is the journey upwards. We all know that Mount Everest is more than 8,000 meters above sea level. What's less known is that the Mariana Trench is more than 8,000 meters below sea level. It's virtually an inverted Everest. This is about growing down. This is the journey to authenticity. The journey, and success, folks, isn't just about going up. Success is about getting deeper. And what I respect in people today who have taken this Mariana Trench, who have found their own Challenger Deep through some struggles in their life, through failures in their life, through losses in their life, and have embraced it and leaned into the difficult and have grown down and have brought that depth to the world. This is what I would call authenticity. The other Everest defined as embracing a time of great difficulty, allowing the pain to break us open so that a stronger, wiser, and kinder self will emerge. This is the work of the authentic journey. Sometimes, folks, we hide. As I said earlier, we are trained, we are hardwired as kids to hide as a way of protecting ourselves. And when we're 6 years old, we have to hide because the world of adults is so big, but we don't have to hide anymore. But we can begin to notice this protective response that we can all have to pain in our life, to the grief that goes on in our life, to the pain around us. Complaining, blaming, negativity, false positivity, pretending that everything is fine, forwarding every message. I say binge watch, and by the way, you put social media on top of this, and it's a way of deflecting. You see, what we're talking about here, instead of distracting, deepening. And whenever we distract, we avoid an opportunity to deepen. And we all do it. Now, when you put this on anonymous social media, that's not going to help us become more authentic. We just deflect from our authentic self. I say binge watch. I don't want to pick on Netflix, but what I would really say is that we're binge watching drama, the drama of life. News predominantly is drama. There's probably 10% of news that's very informative, and I want to be informed about what's going on in the world. But then we stay in the drama. And we live in the drama. And I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just simply saying, notice that it's a way of protecting ourselves. We've had a bad day. Let me just put myself in front of a horror movie or a dramatic movie to deflect myself from the day. Sometimes we need to do that. But if that becomes our modus operandus, that becomes a pattern that distances us from who we really are. Rather than coming home and saying, you know what, I had a rough day. Why have I had a rough day? What's been going on? Where did I compromise myself? Where did I give up my authentic self? Talking it through, taking reflective time, learning from the day that you've had, so that you can begin to say, you know what, I learned something. I'm going to reorient myself to being more courageous tomorrow. That's where I was so exhausted. Rather than simply succumbing to the urge when we get home to have, let me just release this and just get away from it. And then otherizing, which is so prevalent today, where we begin to categorize and put people into boxes. And we put people into camps as a way of feeling our own sense of safety. Number 3, be curious. You watch kids, they're curious. Now, the interesting thing is that we got to understand is that if it's not outside your comfort zone, it's really not curiosity. You got to look outside of your comfort zone. You will not grow in your comfort zone. You'll be comfortable, but you got to stretch yourself. Connect with diversity around you that's outside of your comfort zone. And what I'm going to suggest, take another to lunch. Now, what I mean by that is this: pick somebody that thinks completely differently than you, that is, that's a different political person, different view of politics, a different view of the pandemic, a different view, if you can get them to go to lunch with you, a different view of life, and sit and listen to what they really care about. And what you begin to understand is that underneath our opinions, there's a deep sense of caring in the world, and we need to tap into that caring. I have a family member that thinks very different than the rest of us around, an extended family member who thinks very differently politically. And you can imagine, I come from Alberta here, so you can imagine some of the, I won't go down that road, but what we ended up having a conversation over Easter is that we said, listen, you know what, let's not fight over these little things. Let's make sure we remember that underneath the opinions and the viewpoints and the politics, underneath that, we care about each other. And we forget that underneath this, what we have in common. It's really interesting. I just finished a documentary. I was hired by a firm to do a documentary. And what the documentary was a vegan talking to a feedlot operator, if you can imagine. And the healing that went on in that conversation over a period of, it was not just one conversation. This vegan went down and visited the feedlot and found out how this person was managing their feedlot. And then the feedlot operator visited the vegan and had this community that was built between them that would have been potentially very divisive, was a joining opportunity. They didn't need to agree with each other, but there was an understanding and a sense of respect for each other as human beings, regardless of what our opinions are on the outside. Number 4, open your heart. Open your heart, folks. Open your heart to other people. We have so much divisiveness today, so much dividedness because we haven't stopped. And partly, I will say that the pandemic has been a contributing factor. The muscles haven't been developed for us to sit together and really dialogue with each other. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a Danish, it's about a 3-minute Danish little documentary to show about opening your heart. And many of you, I'm sure, have seen this, but it's a good reminder in the context of creating safe workplaces and safe lives around us, within us and around us, by honoring the human condition.
It's easy to put people in boxes. There's us, and there's them. The high earners, and those just getting by. Those we trust, and those we try to avoid. There's the new Danes, and those who've always been here. The people from the countryside, and those who've never seen a cow. The religious, and the self-confident. There are those we share something with, and those we don't share anything with. Break up
Jeg kommer til at stille jer nogle spørgsmål i dag. Nogle af dem kan godt være lidt personlige, men jeg håber, I vil svare ærligt på dem. Hvem herinde i rummet var klassens klovn? Hvem er bonusforældre?
And then suddenly, there's us. We who believe in life after death. We who've seen UFOs. And all of us who love to dance. We who've been bullied. And we who've bullied others. And then there's us, the lucky ones who've had sex this past week. We who are broken-hearted. We who are madly in love. We who feel lonely. We who are bisexual. And we who acknowledge the courage of others. We who have found the meaning of life. And we who have saved lives. And then there's all of us, just love Denmark. So maybe there's more that brings us together than we think. TV2 Denmark, all that we share.
So folks, it's my belief that we do have more in common than we have differences. My last point that I'll wrap up with is you got to stay weird. Now, I'm not talking about the kind of weird where you paint your hair green so you can be like all your friends who paint their hair green, because then you're not weird anymore. I'm talking about weirdness, meaning standing alone. It's a lonely journey, but it can't be done alone. Can we stand alone on what we stand for? This is what it means to be weird, because it really isn't weird. It's only judged as being weird, where we can really feel like we can belong somewhere and use our gifts in the service of others. Normal is just someone that you don't know yet. Don't try to make up some kind of story that you're trying to be normal. There is no normal in the human existence. There's no straight lines in nature. There's no perfection in nature. Nature is just simply that. It's nature, and we all just judge it or we embrace it. But let's not trying to be somebody that who we are. Let's make a decision to move toward who we are instead of who we should be or could be or ought to be. And what we get from this is that we get a sense of wonderment in the world. As we started this presentation today, I talked about the wonderment and the authenticity of children. And when you're truly living your life, you understand the truth of this statement that I hope I never get so used to the world that it no longer seems wonderful. We have forgotten what it means to live in a wonderful world. And when we shut off a side of ourselves, we will stop seeing the wonder. And my hope today is that through living an authentic life and living toward the process, it's not an event, it's not a destination, it's really a method of travel. But as we move toward embracing the fullness of ourselves, we will begin to see the enormous beauty, the ecstasy, and the agony of this human experience. And my hope is that we can embrace it with all of our hearts, and that we can make life meaningful that it's meant to be. So with that note, I will just end with this thought. My whole model is based on, outside here is what we call organizational culture, organizational leadership practices and abilities. And what's inside are our presence, which are your inner abilities that come out through this journey inwards. And we still have a few seats. I know it's very late notice, but if any of you would still like to, if any of this speaks to you and you want to spend 3 days with us, we've got people from across the country and a wide variety of organizations. And this is what we're going to be offering over these 3 days, April 26 and 27, 28. And I'm so excited and thrilled. I know there's people on this call that are going to be in that, it being in there. And we start the day with a Cree elder who's going to do some smudging for us and give us some Indigenous wisdom. And then we go from there. Day 1 is on leadership presence. Day 2 is on leadership practice. And then day 3 is on integrating them and designing a blueprint for a continued authentic journey. So some people will tell me that it's transformational. It's hard to know when that transformation happens or what it is. For some people, it's their increase in confidence, clarity, sense of connection, a community, whatever you feel like you are called to. I just wanted to let you know that there's still some seats available, and Kristen will be posting the links on there.